All right, let's dive in. Today we're heading back in time, way back, to the shores of Galilee.
Ah, Galilee.
Yeah, sandals, sunshine.
You can almost smell the fish in the air, right?
Exactly, and a crowd's gathering.
Drawn in by this, well, charismatic teacher, Jesus.
And he's about to tell some of the most well-known stories ever.
That's right. The parables from Matthew chapter 13.
So I guess we should talk a little bit about the context first.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. These weren't just bedtime stories. You know?
No, definitely not.
They were radical, revolutionary even. You've got people expecting a conquering Messiah.
Right, the whole conquering hero thing.
And here comes Jesus talking about a kingdom of heaven. And he uses parables to explain it, to make it, make sense, you know?
I guess it's kind of like a first century TED Talk.
Yeah. Using everyday images so everyone could understand.
So which parable kicks off this collection in Matthew 13?
Well, we start with the parable of the sower. Classic Jesus. It starts with a simple scene. Something everyone back then would know. A farmer scattering seed.
Okay, I can picture that.
Some seed lands on the path, some on rocky ground, some among thorns, and then finally some on good soil.
Okay, I'm seeing where this is going. There's a twist.
Of course. This isn't just any seed, right? It's the Word of God.
And
the different types of soil, they represent the different ways people receive the message.
So less about agriculture, more about, well, the human heart.
Exactly.
So let's break it down. Someone who's like that hard-packed path.
They might hear the message, yeah, but it doesn't sink in, like those birds that snatch up the seeds before they can even sprout, you know?
Okay, makes sense.
Then you've got the rocky ground. The seed sprouts fast, but it withers away quickly, too. That's like someone who gets all excited about their fate. But, you know, when things get tough, they give up.
Yeah, been there. What about the thorns? Those sound a little menacing.
They are. Thorns represent the stuff of life. You know, worries, distractions, busyness, the stuff that just chokes out any deeper meaning.
So the seed might sprout, but it's got to fight to survive.
Exactly.
So that leaves us with the good soil.
Ah, yes.
That's the ideal, right? The person who's ready to receive the message.
It's more than just being receptive. Think of it as a heart that's ready for growth. They've done the work to, prepare the soil, remove the obstacles, made space for faith to flourish.
So it's not just like passively listening, it's active, engaged.
Exactly.
I like that. That makes me think, how do we cultivate that good soil? Is it a one-time thing?
Yeah.
Or is it more of an ongoing thing?
Oh, it's totally ongoing.
Yeah.
Just like a gardener tends their soil, right?
Right.
We need to tend to our spiritual lives.
Right.
Weeding out the negativity, nurturing our connection with God.
Making space for reflection.
Yes. It's a journey, not a destination.
And speaking of journeys, we have more parables in Matthew 13, right?
Oh, yeah.
Ones that use totally different images, metaphors.
Right. We move away from the farm, and Jesus uses other everyday stuff to describe the kingdom. Like, for example, the mustard seed. It's tiny, almost nothing, but it grows into a massive tree.
That's interesting.
It provides shelter and shade for birds.
Yeah.
All kinds of creatures.
That idea that something so small can become so big. There's so much potential there,
Exactly. And Jesus doesn't stop there. He compares the kingdom to yeast, a tiny ingredient, but it changes the whole loaf of bread.
So the point is, the kingdom might start small, but its impact.
Huge.
Yeah. It's not about immediate results or, being flashy. It's that slow and steady change.
You got it. The kingdom might not be obvious, but it spreads. It touches everything.
Yeah.
Like yeast working in the dough or that tiny seed bursting with life.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here. Jesus is using these, relatable things to explain something profound.
Yeah.
Really brilliant, actually. What other metaphors does he use?
Well, then we have the hidden treasure and the pearl of great price. They shift the focus to the value of the kingdom.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine you're walking through a field and you find buried treasure.
Wow.
Or you're a merchant searching for that perfect pearl. And then, boom, there it is. The most beautiful gem you've ever seen.
Okay.
Both parables highlight how valuable the kingdom is, worth giving up everything for.
Wow. Makes you think, what would I give up for something that valuable? It's a big question.
It is. What matters most? What would we sacrifice to get this incredible treasure?
All right, this is getting pretty deep. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's look at another parable in Matthew 13. One that has a bit of a different feel to it.
You're talking about the parable of the net, right?
Yeah, the net. This one seems a bit more intense.
It does, doesn't it? So picture this. Fishermen casting a net. They haul it in. It It's full of fish, all kinds good and bad. They sort through them, keep the good ones, toss the bad.
Okay, so what's the meaning behind all this fishing?
Well, Jesus says it represents the final judgment. The net is the world, all the fish are humanity. At the end, there's a separation, the righteous from the wicked.
Okay, that's a powerful image.
It is. It reminds us our choices have consequences.
It also highlights the importance of aligning ourselves with what's good.
Exactly, with the values of the kingdom.
You know, it strikes me, all these parables, they're not just stories, they're, well, calls to action, invitations to examine our lives.
Yeah.
And make choices that, that resonate with the heart of the kingdom.
That's it. Jesus is challenging us to go deeper, to think about our relationship with God, with the world, with ourselves. He uses these images, these everyday images, to make profound truths, well, accessible.
And it's brilliant. He takes farming, fishing, and uses them to reveal these deeper spiritual realities. He's like, hey, look, the kingdom's all around you. Just got to see it.
Exactly. And that's why they're so powerful. They speak to us today, just like they did back then, because they tap into something deep about being human.
They make us ask those big questions.
What do we value? What matters to us? How do we want to live?
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Matthew 13, anything you think we should emphasize? A key takeaway, so to speak.
The main thing here is that the kingdom isn't some far-off concept.
Okay.
It's here and now, but it's also in the future. It's both hidden and revealed. It's at work in the world, but it's also something we're building.
So it's not just about waiting, it's about living out those values, right now, today.
Yes. And those parables with their images and truths, they're a roadmap, a guide for how to live in that kingdom reality. But to really understand that how, we should probably dig a little deeper into some of the individual parables.
I like where you're going with this. Let's pause here and come back ready to unpack those nuances and really explore what these parables mean for us today.
Welcome back. So we're going deeper now, exploring those nuances, those layers of meaning that make these parables so rich. Let's start with the parable of the sower again. Remember, we talked about the different soils, representing different hearts. Well, it's important to remember that those soils, they can change throughout our lives, I mean.
Yeah, it's not like we're stuck as one type forever, right?
Right.
And I've definitely had my rocky ground phases,
Yeah.
Doubt creeps in, fear, and even those thorn times. When
Mhm.
life gets busy, stressful, it definitely chokes out, any spiritual growth I'm trying to, cultivate.
Exactly. Life happens, things change. But that's the beauty of this parable. There's hope. It reminds us we can always cultivate that good soil, even if we felt, like a barren wasteland before.
So how do we do that? Cultivate that good soil. What does that look like? More scripture, more prayer. What's the active engagement part look like?
It's not just about, rituals, although those can help. It's about being intentional, creating space for silence, reflection, connecting with something bigger than ourselves. It's about paying attention to what feeds our souls, what drains us,
I like that. Tending a garden, weeding out the negative thoughts, the bad habits, making sure we're getting enough sunlight, those things that bring joy and purpose.
Exactly. And sometimes it's about asking for help. We don't have to do this alone. Communities, mentors, spiritual practices, they can all help along the way.
It makes me think of that mustard seed parable. Starts so small, but with the right conditions, boom, it explodes.
Right, that's such a good connection. It reminds us that even a tiny bit of faith can have a ripple effect. It might not seem like much at first, but with nurturing, it becomes extraordinary.
Speaking of extraordinary, those parables about the hidden treasure and the pearl, they suggest that the kingdom's so valuable you'd give up everything for it.
Exactly. They make us think about what really matters. The merchant who finds the pearl, he doesn't even hesitate. He sells everything to get it. It's total commitment.
It makes you wonder, what are our pearls today? Those things we'd sacrifice so much for.
It's a big question, isn't it? For some, maybe it's family, community, their art, pursuing justice, maybe their connection to nature. It's finding what gives meaning, purpose to life.
And sometimes that means letting go of other things, things we thought were important, like the merchant, selling all he has to get the pearl.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what truly matters and then, making sure our actions reflect that. It's not always easy, but the parables remind us the reward is huge.
This goes back to the parable of the net, doesn't it? That final sorting.
It does. It's a powerful image.
Yeah.
A reminder that our choices matter. But it's not about fear, It's about living intentionally, aligning our lives with those good values, those values that resonate with the kingdom.
I used to think that parable was kind of harsh,
Yeah.
black and white. But you're right, it's not about fear, it's about awareness. We have a choice in how we live, how we engage with the world, what kind of fish we want to be.
And that choice, that engagement, it's in all these parables. Tending the soil, nurturing the seed, looking for the treasure, aligning with the good.
So as we reflect on all this from Matthew 13, what's the common thread? What's the main takeaway for everyone listening?
The key is, the kingdom isn't some far-off utopia. It's in our lives, here and now. It's about cultivating those good qualities, recognizing potential for growth, even in something tiny, and living with the knowledge that our choices, our actions, they shape the world.
Like a wake-up call. Pay attention, engage with the world.
That's it. And while this has given us a lot to think about, the question is, how do we actually live this out? It's easy to talk about it, but how do we translate it into action? Especially today, in the 21st century.
That's the big question, isn't it? And one we'll definitely address when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. Stick around.
All right, we're back, and I'm ready to tackle that big question. How do we actually live out these parables from Matthew 13, today in our modern world?
A question for the ages, right?
Yeah.
It's resonated with people for centuries, honestly. And while there's no, one right answer, I do think these parables offer some guidance.
Remember that parable of the sower? We talked about it, but just hearing the message isn't enough.
Yeah.
We have to cultivate the good soil, right?
Right.
So it can actually take root, flourish.
Right, that active engagement. But practically speaking, what does that even mean?
It starts with being self-aware. What are those rocks in your life? The thorns.
Okay.
The things that are holding you back, spiritually. Is it being too busy, fear, negative thoughts? Once you see those obstacles, then you can start to weed them out.
So creating that space internally, externally, for those seeds to grow.
Exactly. It might mean starting a daily meditation practice, spending time in nature, finding a spiritual community, or even just taking a few minutes each day to, reflect, be quiet.
It's interesting you mentioned connection. It makes me think of the mustard seed. It grows into that big tree, right? Shelter for the birds. Like a whole ecosystem, a place of, refuge and connection.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it highlights how important community is in our spiritual lives. I mean, we're not meant to go through this alone, finding a supportive group, whatever that looks like for you. It can give you that sense of belonging, encouragement.
And maybe those communities are where we find those modern day pearls you were talking about, the things we value so much, we're willing to give things up for them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a cause that fires us up, or some creative outlet that, really speaks to our soul, or just, I don't know, dedicating ourselves to helping others, compassion.
I think you're onto something there, aligning our actions with our values. The parables remind us that the kingdom isn't somewhere else. It's here, in our lives, in the choices we make, how we treat each other, how we engage with the world.
So living out these parables, maybe it's less about the big things and more about, the little things, everyday kindness, compassion, being intentional.
Absolutely. Cultivating that good soil inside and then letting it bloom into action. Maybe it's helping someone who needs it, standing up against injustice, choosing to forgive instead of holding on to anger, or just being grateful even when things are tough.
It's about understanding we all have a part to play, right, in building the kingdom, even if what we do seems, insignificant.
Exactly. Remember the mustard seed. It can become a huge tree. And that tiny bit of yeast changes the whole loaf of bread. Our actions, even small ones, they can have a ripple effect, change our lives, and change the world.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into the parables, is there, a final thought, something you want listeners to walk away with?
I think it comes down to this. The kingdom of heaven isn't about watching from the sidelines. It's an invitation. Participate, engage, cultivate, create. It's about realizing that the potential for change, it's within each of us. And with a little effort, a lot of love, we can make something truly amazing.
Beautiful. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time. Until then, may your hearts be fertile ground, may those seeds of faith take root, and may your lives reflect that transformative power of the